Trust doesn't shatter in a single moment. It crumbles slowly, piece by piece, until one day you're left staring at an empty space where it once was. That's what happened with Laura. But I never imagined how far she'd go to betray me. We're married for 7 years. 7 good years or so, I thought. I wasn't naive enough to think we were perfect, no couple is, but we had a rhythm. We knew each other's quirks, our fights didn't last long, and the quiet moments together still felt comforting. It wasn't a fireworks display, but it was steady, like a warm, glowing ember. I thought that was enough. I thought it was what she wanted too. But then the ember started to fade. It began with little things, tiny shifts that on their own didn't seem like much. Laura had always been a social media junkie, scrolling through Instagram or chatting with her friends during downtime. But lately, her phone was glued to her hand. She wasn't scrolling aimlessly anymore. She was typing long, involved messages that made her smile faintly in a way that felt private. I tried not to read into it at first. After all, she had a demanding job, and her coworkers were like family. Maybe it was work, maybe it was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. I'd notice her turning her phone face down whenever I walked into the room, her excuses for needing alone. Time, long bubble baths, late nights at her laptop, grew more frequent. One night, I jokingly asked her if she was writing a novel with all the typing she'd been doing. She laughed it off, but there was something guarded in her expression, something that felt off. Then came the night I found it. It was late, and Laura had fallen asleep on the couch. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, lighting up the room, with its soft glow. I wouldn't have looked, but the screen lit up again, and again, and again. The same notification. New message, click to view. A heavy feeling settled in my chest. I didn't know why. It could have been anything. But there was a weight in my chest that I couldn't shake. I told myself it was probably a group chat or something harmless. But my feet moved on their own. Before I knew it, I was standing over her, staring down at her phone, one shaky hand reaching out. It wasn't a group chat. It was a dating app. A goddamn dating app. Her profile picture was one I didn't recognize, some candid shot that looked like it had been taken at a work event. She wasn't dressed provocatively or anything, but it was polished, deliberate, as if she'd chosen it carefully. The bio was short and vague. Looking for someone to make me laugh. Just seeing where this goes. Just seeing where this goes. I scrolled through the messages. There weren't dozens, but enough. Flirty exchanges with strangers, inside jokes with men I'd never heard of. And the worst part? She sounded so happy. Like she was alive in a way I hadn't seen in months. I stood there for what felt like hours, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would wake her. My mind raced through 1,000 questions. Why? When did this start? What did I do wrong? I wanted to shake her awake and demand answers, but the lump in my throat kept me rooted in place. Eventually, I put the phone back on the table and walked to our bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the darkened window. I thought I'd cry, or scream, or break something, but I didn't. I just sat there, numb, until the sun started to rise. The next morning, Laura acted like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, joked about how she'd fallen asleep watching some dumb reality show, and asked if I wanted pancakes. I played along, pretending everything was fine, but my insides felt like they'd been hollowed out. That's when I realized I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I didn't have the words or the strength or even the full story. I needed time to think, to process, and, if I was being honest with myself, to dig deeper. It wasn't just curiosity or anger. It was survival. If this was the end of my marriage, I needed to know how it had started. That night, while Laura was in the shower, I sat at my laptop and created an account on the same dating site. I chose a fake name, a generic profile picture, and a bio that sounded just charming enough to be believable, and then I waited. To my horror, it didn't take long to find her. She was right there, listed among the suggested matches, her profile glowing on the screen like a neon sign screaming, "You were right. You were never enough." My hands shook as I sent the first message. Simple, casual. "Hey, you have a great smile. What brings you here?" When she replied a few hours later, my heart broke all over again. Her message was flirty, playful, and so full of warmth that I barely recognized the woman I thought I knew. And just like that, the game began. The first time she responded, it felt like a punch to the gut. I sat there staring at her message for what must have been 10 minutes, my fingers hovering over the keyboard like they were frozen. She was funny, playful, and oddly sincere in a way she hadn't been with me in months. It wasn't over-the-top flirty, but there was an energy behind her words that twisted something deep in my chest. This was Laura, the woman I fell in love with, the one who'd laugh at my dumb jokes and stay up late talking about everything and nothing. Except now, she was sharing that part of herself with someone she thought was a stranger. It wasn't just betrayal, it was competition. I wish I could say that I stopped, that I closed my laptop and walked away, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned into the lie. I became Jake, the charming, confident guy she thought she wanted. It felt surreal, typing out compliments and clever one-liners while she sat just a few feet away watching TV or scrolling through her phone. Each time she responded, it was like pulling at a thread I couldn't stop unraveling. Over the next few days, I learned more about my wife than I had in years. She liked running in the mornings now, something she hadn't done since college. She'd started reading thrillers, which explained the stack of books on her nightstand I'd never seen her touch. And she hated her job, despite the smile she always wore when she talked about it at dinner. And then there were the little things, the quirks and confessions that made her feel real and raw in a way she hadn't been with me in so long. I wasn't sure which hurt more, the fact that she was sharing these parts of herself with Jake, or the realization that I'd stopped asking. At first, I told myself I was doing this to gather evidence, to understand the full scope of her betrayal. But the deeper I got, the more I realized it wasn't just about catching her. It was about control. If I could keep her engaged with me online, then maybe I could stop her from meeting anyone else. Maybe I could keep her from crossing a line that felt impossible to come back from. It worked, too. Laura and Jake started messaging every day, usually in the evenings when she'd say she needed to catch up on work. I'd be sitting on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, while she sat across the room, typing furiously, smiling at her screen. I'd ask her about her day, and she'd mumble something about spreadsheets or client emails, never looking up. Meanwhile, she was telling Jake about how hard her day had been, how much she wished she could just quit and start fresh somewhere new. The irony wasn't lost on me. One night, as I was scrolling through her profile for the 100th time, I noticed something new. She'd updated her bio. It now read, "Still figuring things out, looking for something real." Something real. It was like a slap in the face. I closed my laptop so hard the sound echoed through the living room. Laura glanced up from her phone, startled. "Everything okay?" she asked, her tone casual, like she wasn't actively lying to me with every breath she took. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired. I think I'll head to bed." She nodded, her eyes already back on her screen, and I walked to the bedroom, shutting the door behind me. That was the night I decided I couldn't let this go on much longer. Over the next week, I started laying the groundwork for what I knew had to be done. I transferred money out of our joint account into one I'd opened in my name. I double-checked that my name was still on the house deed, just in case. And I found a lawyer, someone discreet, who assured me the paperwork would be ready whenever I needed it. At the same time, I kept up my act as Jake. We started talking about meeting in person, just casual suggestions at first, like, "It'd be nice to grab coffee sometime." I could tell she was hesitant, But there was a spark of curiosity in her replies that told me it was only a matter of time. Part of me wanted to believe that she wouldn't go through with it, that this was all just a fantasy she'd indulge in online, but never let spill into the real world. But I couldn't take that chance. The closer we got to setting a date, the harder it became to keep up the charade. Every message she sent felt like a dagger. Every smile she gave me at home felt like a lie. I started avoiding her as much as I could, leaving early for work and coming home late, just so I wouldn't have to sit across from her at the dinner table. She noticed, of course. "Are you okay?" she asked one night, her voice soft with concern. I looked up from my plate, forcing myself to meet her eyes. For a moment I saw the woman I married, the one who used to curl up next to me on the couch, who used to make me laugh so hard I'd cry. But then I remembered the messages, the lies, the profile that promised she was looking for something real. "Just tired," I said, offering her a small smile. She nodded, but her brow furrowed, like she didn't quite believe me. If only she knew the truth. The next day, I sent her a message as Jake, asking if she'd like to meet in person. Her response came faster than I expected. "Maybe. I'll have to see how my week looks, but I'd like that." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was it. The end game was finally in sight. All I had to do now was wait. The moment she agreed to meet Jake, my stomach twisted into knots. I wasn't sure what I expected, but seeing her write, "I'd like that," made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before. This wasn't just flirting or harmless escapism. She was ready to take it to the next level. It was both a confirmation of my worst fears and a cruel validation of why I'd started this whole charade. She was ready to meet a stranger, a man she thought was someone else, and she didn't hesitate. From that moment on, the dynamic between Jake and Laura shifted. Her messages became more frequent, her responses quicker. She'd check in during the day, a habit that made me wonder what part of her schedule she was carving out for this secret life. At work? During her lunch break? In the car on her way home to me? The bitter irony of it all wasn't lost on me. She was emotionally cheating on me, with me. The guilt of playing Jake started to claw at the edges of my mind. At night, as I lay next to her in bed, listening to her steady breathing, I'd stare at the ceiling and question what I was doing. Was this crossing a line? Should I have just confronted her outright instead of weaving this elaborate trap? But every time I opened the app, saw her messages, and felt the buzz of her notifications, the anger overrode the guilt. I couldn't stop. Not yet. One night, as we messaged back and forth, Laura said something that made my breath catch. "Talking to you feels easy," she wrote. "Like I don't have to be someone I'm not." I clenched my jaw so hard, it hurt. "Do you feel like you have to be someone else with other people?" I typed back, keeping Jake's tone light and curious. There was a long pause before her reply came. "Sometimes," she wrote, "it's complicated, but you make me feel like myself again." My heart ached in ways I didn't think were possible. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was her confessing, in her own way, that I wasn't enough. That our life together, the one I thought we were building brick by brick, had left her feeling hollow. But instead of saying it to me, her husband, she was telling Jake. I wanted to scream, to throw my phone across the room, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't lose control. Not now. "That means a lot to me," I wrote back. "I feel the same way about you." It was a lie, of course. I didn't feel that way about Laura, this version of her that existed in the sterile, detached world of online messages. I felt that way about the woman I married, the one who used to grab my hand in the middle of a crowded room just because she wanted to feel close to me. But that woman was gone. Or maybe she never existed. The weeks that followed were a blur of carefully crafted messages, long silences filled with doubt, and sleepless nights spent questioning everything. Laura and I fell into a strange rhythm. During the day, we'd go about our usual routines, exchanging the occasional polite word, while at night, she'd pour her heart out to Jake. Every message she sent chipped away at what little hope I had left. She talked about how she felt stuck, how she missed the excitement of feeling desired, how she wished she could just let go and start over. It was like watching her dismantle, our life piece by piece, and I was powerless to stop it. The more she shared, the more I realized just how much of her I'd lost over the years. She wasn't the same person I'd fallen in love with, but then again, maybe I wasn't either. One night, I decided to push her a little further. "If you could do anything right now," I typed, "what would it be? No limits, no consequences, just whatever makes you happy." Her reply came almost instantly. "I'd run away," she wrote. "Just pack a bag and leave everything behind. Go somewhere no one knows me and start fresh." "Sounds like you've thought about this." "A lot," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. "More than I should," she admitted. "But it's not realistic. Too many responsibilities, too many strings." The irony was suffocating. The responsibilities she was talking about, the strings, that was me. I sat back in my chair, staring at her words until the screen blurred. I wanted to scream at her, to demand why she couldn't just talk to me about these feelings instead of running to someone else. But deep down, I already knew the answer. She didn't think I'd listen. As much as it hurt, I couldn't entirely blame her for that. I'd let myself become comfortable, complacent, assuming that what we had was enough. I stopped asking questions, stopped paying attention to the small things that made her who she was. And now, someone else, Jake, was reaping the rewards of my neglect. But it wasn't going to last much longer. After weeks of dancing around the topic, I finally suggested a specific date and time for us to meet. "Let's stop playing games," I wrote. "I want to see you." Her response came slower this time, as if she was hesitating. "I don't know," she wrote. "What if it's awkward?" "It won't be," I promised. "I already feel like I know you better than anyone else." That wasn't a lie. Eventually, she agreed. "Okay," she wrote, "but just coffee, something low-key." "Perfect," I replied. "I can't wait." Neither could I, but for entirely different reasons. As soon as she confirmed the time and place, I started preparing. I didn't sleep that night or the next, running through every possible scenario in my head. What if she didn't show? What if she recognized me before I had a chance to confront her? What if, against all odds, she told me she was sorry? I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Revenge? Closure? Or some impossible, miraculous explanation that would make this all go away? Whatever it was, I knew one thing for sure. When I saw her walk into that coffee shop, there would be no turning back. The days leading up to the meeting felt like moving through a storm. Every thought was sharp, chaotic, and relentless. At work, I'd catch myself staring blankly at my screen, the same words looping in my head. She agreed. She's really going to meet him. She's going to meet me. Laura had no idea I was watching her every move. No idea that her carefully constructed secret life was unraveling right in front of her. She was oblivious, humming in the mornings as she got ready, texting her new man while sipping coffee across from her husband. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the shadows on the ceiling while Laura dozed peacefully beside me. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, inches away from my hand. I didn't need to check it anymore. I already knew what I'd find. She had told Jake she was excited but nervous. She'd suggested a cafe on the quieter side of town, one she liked for its cozy booths and strong coffee. She even joked about what she might wear. "I hope I don't overdress," she'd written. "Anything you wear will be perfect. I'd replied, my hands trembling on the keyboard. Now, lying next to her, the weight of what I was about to do hit me like a brick. Tomorrow wasn't just the day of the meeting. It was the day my life, our life, would change forever. There was no going back once she saw me sitting in that cafe. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, yet I still felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. My anger had driven me this far, but underneath it, there was a deep aching sadness. I wasn't just confronting her. I was letting go of the woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we had. By morning, my resolve had hardened. The day of the meeting, Laura was cheerful. Too cheerful. "I'll be out most of the day," she said as she packed her bag. "There's a lot going on at work, and I might grab dinner with the team afterward. Don't wait up, okay?" Her lies were smooth, practiced, almost effortless. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Take your time." She leaned in to kiss my cheek, the gesture so casual it almost made me laugh. How could she act so normal, so loving, when she was on her way to betray me? As soon as she left, I got to work. I double-checked the divorce papers I'd packed in my bag, making sure everything was in order. My lawyer had helped me include clauses to protect myself financially, locking down joint accounts and ensuring the house was secure in my name. I'd also taken her off the credit cards earlier in the week, a quiet precaution in case things got messy. I didn't know how Laura would react when I handed her the papers, but I needed to be ready for anything. The hours crawled by as I waited for the meeting time. I paced the living room, replaying every message she'd sent to Jake, every word that had pushed me closer to this moment. Part of me wanted to back out, to turn off my phone and pretend none of this had ever happened. But another part, the part that had read her confessions of unhappiness and her fantasies of running away, knew it was too late. I arrived at the cafe 30 minutes early. The place was exactly as she'd described. Small, quiet, with soft jazz playing in the background and a handful of customers scattered at the tables. I chose a booth in the corner, one that gave me a clear view of the entrance, and ordered a coffee I didn't plan to drink. The papers sat in my bag, heavy with unspoken words. Every time the door opened, my heart jumped, but it was never her. I checked the time obsessively, counting down the minutes until she arrived. The cafe started to fill up, but the noise barely registered. My entire focus was on that door, waiting for the moment Laura would walk through it. And then she did. She stepped inside, scanning the room with a nervous smile. She was dressed. Simply, a soft sweater and jeans, but she looked different. Lighter, somehow. Happier. It was the same expression I'd seen in her messages, the one that felt so foreign to me now. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just sat there, watching her, my heart pounding in my chest. She didn't see me at first, her eyes searching the room for Jake. I could see the exact moment she spotted me, her smile faltering as confusion crossed her face. She froze, standing in the middle of the cafe like a deer in headlights. "Laura," I said, my voice calm but firm, "come sit down." Her eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape, but she didn't move. Slowly, I stood and gestured to the seat across from me. "Please," I said, "we need to talk." She hesitated, her face pale, before finally walking over and sitting down. She placed her hands on the table, clutching them tightly as she stared at me. What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my seat, studying her. For the first time in weeks, I didn't see the woman who had been messaging a stranger online. I saw my wife, the woman I had loved, the woman who had betrayed me. "I think you know," I said quietly. Her eyes widened, and I saw the realization dawn on her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out the divorce papers and placed them on the table between us. "We need to talk about this," I said, my voice steady. For the first time, Laura looked truly afraid. For a moment, Laura didn't say anything. She just stared at the papers lying on the table between us, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as they rested on her lap. The noise of the cafe seemed to fade, replaced by the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. She finally looked up at me, her eyes wide and glistening. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You know what it is," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "Don't pretend, Laura. I think we're past that." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, to deny it, but no words came out. Instead, she looked back at the papers, her fingers brushing against the edge of the stack as if she were afraid to touch them. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice breaking. Why are you doing this?" I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Why am I doing this? Are you seriously asking me that? You've been lying to me for weeks, probably longer. I know about the dating app, Laura. I know about the messages. I know about Jake." Her head snapped up at that, her eyes widening. Even more. "Jake?" she repeated, her voice trembling. I leaned forward, my hands clasped tightly on the table to keep from shaking. "Yeah, Jake. The guy you've been spilling your soul to, the guy you were so excited to meet today." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "The guy who's been sitting across from you this whole time." Her mouth fell open, and for a moment, she just stared at me in stunned silence. Then she shook her head, her hands flying to her temples like she was trying to process what I'd just said. "Wait, no. That's not possible, Jake. He's not—" "I made the account, Laura," I said, cutting her off. "I've been messaging you this whole time. It was me. Every word, every conversation, it was all me." Her face crumpled as the truth hit her. She looked like she'd been punched, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps as tears welled up in her eyes. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice trembling. You set me up." "I didn't set you up," I shot back, my voice rising. "You set us up when you decided to start looking for someone else. I just found a way to confirm what I already suspected." She shook her head again, her hands gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't think—" "Didn't think what?" I interrupted, anger flaring in my chest. "Didn't think I'd notice? Didn't think I'd care? Or didn't think you'd actually have to face the consequences of your actions?" Tears spilled down her cheeks now, and she wiped at them furiously, her shoulders shaking. "It wasn't about you," she said, her voice breaking. "It was never about you. I felt so lost, so empty. I didn't know how to fix it." I stared at her, my anger giving way to a wave of sadness so heavy it felt like it might crush me. "So you decided to find someone else to fill that emptiness," I said quietly. "And you didn't even bother talking to me about how you felt." She looked away, her gaze fixed on the table as fresh tears slid down her cheeks. "I didn't know how to," she whispered. "You seemed so content, like everything was fine. I didn't want to ruin that for you." "That's not how marriage works, Laura," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You don't get to keep secrets because you're afraid of how the truth might make me feel. You're supposed to tell me when things aren't okay so we can fix them together. But instead, you chose to run away, to hide behind some fake profile and pretend like it wasn't happening." She flinched at my words, her hands balling into fists on the table. "I wasn't running away," she said, her voice rising slightly. "I was trying to find, I don't know, something I lost a long time ago. I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. "You hurt me in ways I didn't even know were possible." And the worst part is, I don't even know if I can forgive you for it." Her head snapped up at that, her eyes wide with panic. "Please," she said, reaching across the table to grab my hand. "Please don't say that. I love you. I do. I know I messed up. But I don't want to lose you." I pulled my hand away, the movement slow but deliberate. "You already lost me, Laura," I said, my voice hollow. "The moment you decided to lie to me, to betray my trust, you lost me. And I don't know if we can ever get that back." She broke down then, her sobs shaking her entire body as she buried her face in her hands. The sight of her crying should have made me feel something, pity, sympathy, even anger, but all I felt was emptiness. After what felt like an eternity, I stood and reached for the papers. I slid them across the table toward her, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. "These are divorce papers," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "You don't have to sign them now. Take your time, read through them. But know this, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not." She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with desperation. "Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. Don't throw us away." I stared at her, my heart breaking all over again. "I'm not the one who threw us away, Laura," I said. "You did." And with that, I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her sitting there with the divorce papers and the shattered pieces of our marriage. The cold air hit me like a slap as I stepped out of the cafe. I hadn't realized how suffocating it felt inside until I was standing there, staring at the quiet street. My chest was tight, my throat raw from holding back everything I wanted to scream at her but couldn't. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. My mind was blank, my body moving on autopilot as I walked to my car. The world felt muted, like I was seeing it through a filter. My thoughts too loud to notice the little things, the sound of passing cars, the murmur of people walking by. When I got into the car, I didn't start it right away. Instead, I gripped the steering wheel and let out a shaky breath, my emotions swirling in a way that made it impossible to settle on just one. Anger, sadness, relief, regret. Mostly regret. I had imagined that moment for weeks, fantasized about what it would feel like to confront her, to see the shock and guilt on her face when she realized she'd been caught. But now that it was over, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt empty. The truth was, I didn't want to be right. I didn't want to be the guy who had to trap his wife in her own lies just to get to the truth. I didn't want to be sitting here, alone in my car, with divorce papers waiting for a signature and a hollow space where my marriage used to be. I wanted to rewind, to go back to before the late nights and the lies, before the distance crept in and pushed us apart. I wanted to go back to when Laura and I were happy, when I didn't have to question whether she was telling me the truth or wonder if I was enough. But that wasn't possible. I started the car and drove aimlessly, not wanting to go home just yet. Home didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place filled with ghosts, memories of a life I thought we were building together. I could already see her there, sitting on the couch with her phone in her hand, the same distant expression she'd worn for months. Except now I knew what that distance meant. I ended up at a park we used to visit when we first got married. It was small, tucked away at the edge of town, with a quiet path that wound around a lake. Laura used to love coming here, especially in the fall when the leaves turned gold and crimson. I parked the car and got out, shoving my hands in my pockets as I walked toward the water. The air was crisp, the faint smell of wet leaves clinging to the breeze. I sat down on a bench overlooking the lake, staring at the still water as my thoughts churned. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. We'd had plans. Dreams of traveling together, starting a family, growing old side by side. We'd talked about buying a cabin in the mountains someday, a place where we could escape from the noise of the world and just be. But somewhere, along the way, those dreams had faded. We'd stopped talking about the future, stopped reaching for each other in the middle of the night. We'd become strangers in our own home, and neither of us had the courage to say it out loud. I kept telling myself that her betrayal was the cause of everything, but deep down I knew better. It was a symptom, not the disease. Somewhere along the way, we both stopped trying. The realization didn't make it hurt any less. If anything, it made it worse. It meant that this wasn't just her fault, it was mine too. I had let the cracks in our marriage grow, ignoring them until they became chasms too wide to bridge. I pulled out my phone and opened the dating app, staring at her profile one last time. The picture she'd chosen, the bio she'd written, it all felt like a lie. Now, a mask she'd put on to hide the parts of herself she couldn't share with me. But the truth was, I wasn't innocent either. I had created my own mask in Jake, pretending to be someone I wasn't just to lure her into a trap. I had stooped to her level, and now I was paying the price. With a deep breath, I deleted the app and watched as her profile disappeared from my screen. It was a small act, but it felt like a step towards something final. When I got home, the house was dark. Laura's car wasn't in the driveway, and for a moment, I wondered where she had gone. Was she driving aimlessly too, trying to make sense of what had just happened? Or was she sitting somewhere staring at the divorce papers, trying to figure out what to do next? I didn't know, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to. I went inside and sat down at the kitchen table, the silence pressing in around me. The house felt different now, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but the tears never came. Instead, I just sat there, staring at the empty seat across from me where Laura usually sat. I thought about what she'd said at the cafe, that she felt lost, that she didn't know how to fix the emptiness inside her. I thought about how I'd felt the same way, but instead of reaching for her, I'd let the distance grow. Maybe there was a way back from this. Maybe, if we both tried, we could find a way to heal the wounds we'd inflicted on each other. But as I sat there in the dark, I couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of my mind, the one that whispered that some things, once broken, can never be put back together. I didn't know what the future held. All I knew was that this chapter of my life was over, and whatever came next, I would face it alone.